Okay, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. It's our pleasure to welcome you to a joint initiative between BioMaine and the Maine Life Sciences Network. Please forgive me if you hear a dog whining in the back. He seems to think when I sit at the kitchen table, he should have a treat. Um, it is so exciting to be able to offer this opportunity to meet up. As many of you may know, the Maine Life Sciences Network has been an organic organization that has been established across the state of Maine to allow scientists and those who are advocates for science to convene institution agnostically. We have been shifting over the last few years to having an all hands meeting every 2 months. And today we're so glad to have this joint venture with BioMaine. For those of you who don't know, we have a website called mainelifesciences.org where we've been starting to aggregate information across the state to try and offer a lot of the things that we've heard the community has been interested in. If you haven't had an opportunity to join us there yet, please take a look and feel free to give feedback as we have total control of how we're actually setting up the site. Without further ado, I want to hand this off to my partner, Agnieszka Carpenter.
Thank you, Eileen. Hi, everyone. My name is Agnieszka Carpenter. I'm the Executive Director for BioMaine, and I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so nice to see you all. Thank you for joining, and also nice to welcome you if you're new. BioMaine is Bioscience Association of Maine, so we're the trade industry group for life sciences in Maine, and throughout the year, we organize all kinds of different events. This one is our summer virtual event, and we're very happy to be collaborating with the Maine Life Sciences Network on this event. We have some great speakers today, so we're looking forward to the discussion. I also wanted to mention that if you're craving an in-person meeting, we'll have two opportunities coming up. One will be in September, and that's our Bio and Brews. We don't have the location 100% confirmed yet, but once we do, we'll announce it on our LinkedIn and via email. And then on October the 14th is our big annual conference, and registration for that is already open. You can take advantage of early bird pricing. So we will paste a link in the chat for that. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's discussion, Dr. Caitlin Howell from UMaine.
Thank you, Agnieszka, and thank you and Eileen both for being the catalyst to make this event happen. I hope that I speak for everyone when I say it's events like these that really help us get together as a community and look for ways that we can all begin to contribute and grow Maine life sciences and our economy. So thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here today joining us for this panel, Translating Discovery from Research and from Research to Commercialization. So we're very happy to have you join us today to be able to speak with our four incredible panelists, folks who have gone from research innovation to entrepreneurship, starting a business here in the state of Maine. We're very excited to learn from them today, their stories, what they went through, what they learned, and what we can take away as we start to look at doing similar things, supporting people who are doing similar things, or just getting involved, whatever our skill sets may be. So just a quick overview of how we're going to handle this panel today. I will be posing some broad level questions to our panelists to begin with, allowing them to share their stories and their perspectives on some critical topics. After that, I will open this to questions from the audience. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at that time, or if you would prefer, raise your hand, and if I can see you, I will call on you, or Agnieszka or Eileen can help me with that. And then after that, we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So without further ado, let's get going. Welcome, panel. If you wouldn't mind, please, let's just take 2 minutes for everyone to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background, 2 minutes each. All right, I'll just go in order of my screen. So Catherine, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much, Caitlin, and thanks to the organizers for having me. By way of background, I'm a Maine native almost. We moved to Maine when I was one. I grew up in Orono. I'm a scientist by training and actually had my first laboratory exposure as a summer high school student at the Jackson Lab back in the day. I spent about 10 years out of state for my training. I actually have a PhD in cancer biology specifically, so the rest of my career has been oncology focused from Stanford University, and was fortunate there actually to participate in a dual degree program that actually was focused towards fostering the next generation of scientists interested in translational work. And so we did the first 2 years of medical school alongside the medical students. And when they went back to finish their training in clinic, we went back to apply our sort of translational lens to the laboratory. I came back to the East Coast for a postdoc at the Whitehead Institute of MIT. There again, still oncology focused in the wet laboratory, understanding mechanisms of cancer initiation, therapy resistance. But my heart was really outside of the wet laboratory, outside of academic research. And so I ventured into the field, which was pretty new at the time, of precision medicine and precision oncology. And I've spent the last 15 years at the intersection of the science, medicine, and really data and technology in various organizations, trying to understand how those three can overlap and ultimately power the next set of innovations for our patients. Most recently, I was actually at a cancer detection company. So we had a blood test for cancer detection and led the evidence generation. So running our clinical studies, but also building up the data and technology platforms. And so all of that sort of led me to think, what do I want to do next? I'd always been part of early stage environments, even within a larger organization, a new group that was being formed. So at the time, I didn't realize it, but I was definitely gravitating towards the startup mentality. And about a year and a half ago, I formed Savvyn, which is a software company for life sciences that's focused on really automating that path from the research to commercialization. And you might ask what that means, and I'm happy to go into it. But essentially, we're trying to automate through multi-agentic platform what a human might do to say, okay, we have this body of evidence, these clinical studies. How do we translate that into what a funder might need to see for Medicare to approve your test or for that product to get into the guidelines and things like that? So it's been an exciting journey. We're fairly early stage, but yeah, happy to share more as the questions emerge.
Very exciting. Thank you, Catherine. All right, next on my screen is David.
Thank you, Caitlin. My name is David Kuhrt. I'm the president and CEO of Tidal Diagnostic Solutions. I have a PhD in microbiology and spent about 15 years in academia. Uh, I transitioned to doing work with diagnostics in the infectious disease space in industry and did that for about 10 years. And had an opportunity in 2025 to co-found a business with two fantastic scientists that I can work with today. Our mission is to improve diagnostic testing for diseases that are transmitted by ticks. I'll use that interchangeably with tick-borne diseases as we talk more. Um, so what we're focusing on is really things that are not Lyme. So where we found a niche in the market is that Lyme disease is really well covered, but others are not. And so we're really focused on a market gap and how we can fill that. And I'm happy to talk more as the time goes on.
All right, thank you, David. Also very interesting work. Next up, Liza.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you everybody and the organizers for having me. I'm the CTO and co-founder of EliVive, born and raised in Rumford, Maine. For those of you that don't know, it's a small mill town in Western Maine. And then I graduated and came to the University of Maine, where I ended up staying for my PhD in biomedical engineering, and I completed that actually last August. During my PhD, I really focused on optical water sensors and developing sustainable materials. But I became very fascinated with like how to take those technologies that I was developing in the lab and turning them into products. But ironically, I never planned to be an entrepreneur. I just love being a scientist, and my dream was to invent something that could be licensed so that people could actually use it, but I could stay in research. But really, that all changed during my final months of my PhD. I was invited to speak at a technology translation workshop that's hosted by Ateclo. They're a new Maine venture studio here. And then at that event, I actually met my now co-founder and we immediately connected. We both realized that we're deeply affected by hormonal imbalance issues. And we were really frustrated with just how little data exists in women's health and how that can contribute to delayed diagnostics and limited understanding of just hormone conditions and how to treat them. And so that conversation actually became the foundation for EliVive. And so today we're developing a wearable device that continually monitors women's hormones through sweat. So we want to give women the ability to monitor their hormones without the need of blood draws or urine tests or collecting their saliva. So the goal is really to be non-invasive and continuous. But we're still very early. We started just last August, so we're starting to still figure things out. But it's been a fun journey so far, and I can't wait to talk to you guys about it more today.
Great, thank you, Liza. And finally, Peter.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Caitlin. So my name's Peter Brooks. I'm a faculty scientist here in Maine. Actually grew up here, further north, but I'm a faculty scientist at the Maine Health Institute for Research. I'm not a business person, but I really was introduced to the whole concept of entrepreneurial science and because of my interest in seeing how to accelerate the change from basic science to into practical applications. So I really got introduced to it when I was a postdoc in the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla a number of years ago in the laboratory of David Cherish. And we were interested at the time of angiogenesis and cancer biology, and that's sort of my background. And I'm still sort of into that now. And I really became interested in sort of the entrepreneurial side and trying to understand how we could accelerate sort of the movement of various new concepts at the benchtop through the various steps and stages into both clinical development, but also into a sort of a glide path towards commercialization. And we made some seminal observations many, many years ago in terms of endocrine receptors in angiogenesis, and that patent portfolio got licensed out. That really sort of got me introduced to the sort of translational field as it relates to business development. I moved on to USC and then sort of got interested in this model. Well, I call it a model, but this model of sort of academic and industrial partnerships as a mechanism or conduit through which you can move things into both the clinic and eventually into clear commercial development. And since I wasn't a business person, I sort of focused on this approach because what I learned early on was that, at least in my case, I couldn't be wearing all the hats that were necessary to be a successful entrepreneur in terms of business development, finance, fundraising. But what I did do is put together a group of people and try to get them interested in a novel concept to sort of fill a gap in a particular unmet medical need. And we started a company called Cell Matrix back in the day when I was at USC, and we got very lucky and we went and moved from a small startup to a publicly traded company called CancerVax that were eventually bought out by Amgen towards the end. And from that learning experience, I really became convinced that you really could change and take basic science and an idea from the benchtop into the various steps and stages if you put together a team with very diverse backgrounds and unique talents. And I think that's more of where my background comes from. I moved from there to NYU School of Medicine. I was the director of the Angiogenesis and Radiation Research Program there for several years until eventually I moved up here back to Maine. I'm actually a Maine native. And we developed some new insight into how cancer develops. And while most of the field was focused on targeting the cell surface, we decided we were looking at how the extracellular microenvironment, the surrounding stroma, influenced that. And instead of targeting the cell surface, we target extracellular matrix components, in particular cryptic components. And we started a small startup company called CryptoMedix. And that really, the vision of that particular company is to try to develop and new ways of thinking about making a novel set of antibody drug targets, antibody drug conjugates, where most of the field is focused on the cell surface and internalization of drugs into cancer cells. We target the extracellular microenvironment. And we developed a portfolio of patents. And then we brought together some business folks, some people from the finance field, clinical people, and set up a small LLC, which then transitioned to a C Corp. And eventually now what we're looking at is to move these these findings into human clinical testing. So we're in the fundraising mode at this point. So that's sort of where we are. And I'm still basically in the sort of the academic field, I don't run the day-to-day operations of the company.
Understood. You probably still know a thing or two, though. So that actually leads us very nicely into the first question that I would like to ask you all. And that is, we all know that none of this happens without funding. Money is sort of the underpinning of everything, what allows us to do this work or not. So could you share with us how you started funding your company in the early days, or now if your company is in the early days, and what sources of funding proved most valuable for you? Someone like to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So yes, funding is critical. Someone told me once, just don't run out of cash. Number one business, lesson is cash is king. So for early stage funding, Maine is very fortunate to have non-dilutive, very early stage, sort of when you're at your most riskiest funding available. One mechanism that I've used is through the Maine Technology Institute, their business innovation grants, their phase one grants, up to 15,000. They do require a small match, but it's a great way to be able to get started, test your concept, be able to have some accountability towards getting to specific milestones. And then they have follow-on options at larger dollar amounts as well. We're sort of at that stage going from that to a larger funding opportunity. And that has been a particular challenge for us because many of the investor circles really want to see some amount of revenue. And I have found that gap between sort of the earliest stage where you may have non-dilutive, sort of very risky funding available to having your first VC or even angel funds, that has been challenging for us to navigate, and we're in the middle of it right now.
I think I'll jump in at this point because we're in a slightly further along place. And so, as Catherine mentioned, MTI is wonderful for getting off the ground to get that initial funding, but it's the match that's really where kind of the rubber hits the road. So how do you pull in that money? And for us, it was a matter of thinking about how we're selling the business and how we're selling our ideas and how we're selling the team. And so I won't go into the details of exactly what the mechanism is, but we use convertible notes or safe notes in order to get stuff going. And we started small. So seed funding came from friends and family, and then from just talking to as many people as possible. So I've met parents and grandparents of people at baseball games, at soccer games, when I'm just, walking around the grocery store and someone says hi. It's like you just have to talk to everybody that you can, and you'll be surprised if you have 150 conversations, you're going to find a couple people who are willing to at least talk to you. And then that helps you get to, can you find a person to get started? The last little piece that was really helpful for me was starting extremely small. As scientists, I like money seems like $10,000 seems like a lot of money. Um, in some cases, $5,000 is not that much money for some people. And so when you're trying to raise a match for a 30K grant from MTI, for example, finding six people who'd be willing to provide $5,000 is one way to think about it as an option for getting over that hump. So the short is that there are answers to all the questions, and you just have to figure out what works for you, your team, and where you are at the time.
Yeah, so I can chime in a little bit. And I think in our particular case, I think it really matters in terms of what your business structure is to start with, what your company is about. Diagnostics, services, manufacturing, or in our particular case, is therapeutics and development of things that are eventually going to be marketed for treatment in patients. And each sort of bucket or type of company, demands a certain amount of money to begin with. In our particular case, it's lots of lots of money in the millions. And so our strategy early on was to develop value, not to go out and ask for 5 to 10 million, which is really what we needed to start even preclinical work, but in a meaningful way. But rather to build value in the idea that we had, and to build a group of people that when you went to funding strategy, either through venture capital people, which is a hard thing nowadays, and or MTI, is to show them that you have the business group together that mitigates risk, right? So if we were asking for a match of 250, for example, or if you are engaging angel investors, looking at the corporate structure, making sure that your group is mitigating a risk, or the potential funders are mitigating risk for the investors. They want to see a return, right? So they want to make sure that you're understanding the business process itself and where your exit points are. What is that inflection point? Are you looking to merge with another company, and that's the exit point, and that begins to build value for them to get a return on their early investment. So early on, in this particular case, we went through many different ways. We put private money in, our own money from founders. We went and then got small. We've gone the route way back when I was at Scripps. We went the SBIR and SBTTR route from the federal government. We also had some experience with angel investors and MTI as well. We, a number of years ago, from the development of we went a development loan approach. So again, I think it really depends upon your own individual business and the needs that are required. For us personally, we are now looking into the VC rounds, early seed VC rounds, to be able to get enough runway cash to build enough interest that a larger VC group would put the amount of capital needed to get into the clinical trials.
Yeah, and for EliVive, because we met at a Techlo's event, we were actually able to join a Techlo as a portfolio company from them. So we were able to get initial investments and follow-on investments from them. We were also able to secure an MTI grant, and now we're actually going down the stage of getting an SBIR grant with the help of MTI's consultant team. I will say they're very helpful in helping you write those grants. Not only do they give you funding, but they also will help you write the SBRI and STTR grants.
Okay,
Just
that's great.
bring
Go
up
ahead.
one other point that sometimes, again, it's a nice system here at Maine Health, because they have a innovation program which helps to guide you and actually provide some competitive applications for seed funding. And that's another funding approach that people can see that's outside VC groups, angel investors, private money. These are sources of funds that certain universities may have, for example. Maine Health has an innovation program that's been pretty successful. And again, they give small seed development loans, and sometimes they require matching funds, other times not. But it's another source of funding that people can tap into as well, depending upon what your affiliation is.
That's excellent to know. It's really nice to see that we have a lot of support here in the state and the various entities. But I'd like to move on now to another important question. Speaking two languages. So many of us have science backgrounds, but it's critical in these types of endeavors to be able to talk with non-scientists, and particularly people from the business world. Okay, so can you share with us some lessons learned, maybe some misconceptions that you had that got corrected as you began having those discussions outside of science?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think the initial thing that comes to my mind is acronyms. I mean, every field has them, but the business field has a lot of them. And I just like will remember I went to Med Tech Week at the Rue Institute last year, and there was a discussion on finances, and they kept talking about ROI, ROI, and I was like, region of interest, that makes no sense to me, but they were actually talking about return on investment the entire time. And that was definitely a big learning curve. I definitely have like notes on my phone to like keep in track of all the acronyms and when I learn them. So if I hear one, I'm like, is that on my list to remind myself just to how those acronyms and what they do, but also learning how to present the data that you have in a way that a business person cares about. I definitely don't think I've conquered that quite yet, but it's a ever-going revolving conversation of what is that data and what does it look like to make them understand how exciting the data is that I'm trying to show them.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's two very different hats. And um, I've pursued some specific business training as well. I'm currently pursuing an MBA through UMaine's Maine MBA program, and will join the low residency cohort this fall, just to give some additional support in terms of, everything from the nuts and bolts of accounting to customer conversations. There's a whole range that I was never exposed to previously. Um, and but it's also, there's many roles in a company too. So part of it is thinking about what you personally gravitate towards. So if you cannot imagine yourself, being the face of the company and interacting with funders, but you can imagine, being the person that explains the technical aspects or is responsible for compiling, the scientific portfolio. There's multiple ways of sort of founding a company or joining an early stage company. But it is true, to echo Liza's point. Yeah, just the focus is fundamentally different. It's, you've got to generate revenue. You've got to, even if you don't have investors, the focus is generating money for your business. It's not necessarily, proving the next scientific innovation or publishing or grant writing. All those are meaningful. It's a fundamentally different priority, and that was difficult for me to sort of wrap my mind around. But it just takes practice. And maybe the last thing I'll add is I do feel like with the rapid rise of a lot of the AI tools, that's both what my business is built on from a technology, what we're building standpoint, but also without that, I don't think I could have formed this business. It's allowed me to say yes to so many more things like, oh, I've never heard of that, but yes, I can certainly figure it out. It's just enabled things to be so much faster and more sort of reachable, even if it's not your domain expertise.
Peter, I see you come off mute. Did you want to add to that on speaking two languages, business and science?
Caitlin, was that directed to me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So, yeah, I think it's one of the things I learned early on was and it was a difficult lesson for me was trying to understand that the corporate side and the academic side, and I still remain in the academic side, so I have all kinds of struggles dealing with this gap. But what I learned was that one thing that helped me a lot is is understanding that there is a divide there first, right? Is that there is like an operational or cultural divide between academics and business, right? And then not only understanding that, but accepting that the priorities between these two entities are, in fact, can be different, but there also can be cross communication. Understanding, like Lisa said, that there is jargon, there is different terms that people use. This is important as well. But if you can get over your own little silo and understand that the business development people, the VC firms, the other things have a obligation to their stockholders to get a return on investment, and then understand that's not necessarily bad, but that's their priority. Whereas the basic science and the more academically inclined people see it in a slightly different way. So if you learn from each other and not just butt heads all the time, you're going to make a lot more inroads in terms of getting this funding because it brings down the tension. It allows people to trust you that your insight on the basic sides is as important as the fundraising. Because if you don't work together and mesh pretty well, then it's difficult to move the whole program forward. So that was a big learning curve for me personally, and I think over the years we've been able to do that and be able, for me personally, understand and accept that there are these cultural divides and those things are important, and I think it's helped in many ways.
I apologize. I think my internet went out. Can everybody hear me now? Good.
Yes,
Okay.
and it sounds like we're having some popping in and out if everyone else can see that too. All right, fingers crossed the internet doesn't crash on us.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make the quick point. As a scientist, I needed to listen more to people who were non-scientists. And I think that that was a matter of in my conversations, I really needed to be aware when someone gave me the blank stare. And instead of just doubling down and trying to, re-explain the science in a nitty-gritty way, think about how to bring it up to a level that everyone can understand. And that to me was a major sort of hump to get over. How can you explain what it is that you have in a very simple way? And for me, that was the kind of the trigger to when we knew that we were on the right thing because we could make it into a package that was digestible. So
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Okay, so moving on to this, Peter, you actually alluded to this a little bit in your introduction, but I think it's very much worth bringing out and having the whole panel sort of chew on it a little bit. The concept of wearing many hats. So can you share with us a little bit the roles that you found yourselves taking on unexpectedly, what responsibilities ended up being the biggest stretch, and how you actually handled having to do multiple different things?
Yeah, that was a challenge for me. I must say, I got sort of thrown into it early on back at USC and at Scripps, and I think part of it, the initial sort of baptism by fire, if you will, if that's a good term to use, but it was intellectual property and the sort of the legal aspects of this because coming from the basic science side of the equation, I will always put on that academic sort of hat and was really excited about that. And I tend to run off at the mouth too much. And that got us some problems in terms of our intellectual property. And so it was a balancing act. And I finally learned that. So I began to delve more into the intellectual property side and trying to understand what important caveats are to keep in mind to protect your intellectual property because again it all boils back down to the funding to a certain extent because if you don't have something that's protectable it's very difficult to get someone that wants to fund your project or fund your company to pony up a lot of money or even any money if they don't see any protection in the system. So I began to learn a lot about the intellectual property portfolios, strategy behind that, how much effort to put into a provisional application versus a full application, when the timing of putting a provisional application is that it doesn't come back to bite you in the end in case you don't develop enough data. So that's one aspect that I learned. Then we started our own little LLC, most of that was bore out of having a vessel, if you will, to put intellectual property and licensing agreements together. So I worked with folks here and Abram Goldfinger at NYU and a number of others and learned a little bit about contracts and licensing agreements, and sometimes the hard way, thinking that certain language in the licensing agreement it would be conducive to everybody, but people may not like the way you structure those. So again, I learned that a little bit of knowledge can be okay, can help you, but it can also be a bad thing. So I always defer to the experts in the field. That's why I like this idea of bringing groups of people with experts in the field. So from the IP position and from the sort of contract negotiations from licensing agreements are two hats that I early on played a little bit of role with. Of course, the major focus for me was the basic science.
I could take a pass here. I love wearing many hats, which I think is why I like startups and early stage companies. But maybe my point to share is, you don't just suddenly have the ability to wear all the hats, nor am I saying I can wear all the hats, but it's about in your career, if you're offered a hat, take it. Even if you don't know how to wear that hat, you can figure it out. Or you be monitoring for opportunities when different hats become available. It's like, Catherine, you seem to know about data. You're our cybersecurity officer. Okay, great. I know how I can do that. Or could you come up with our biopharma template? Sure, I can do that. And so it's really just about taking those opportunities. I mean, if you want to have some vision for what you maybe, don't want to take on. But by and large, I don't think I've ever regretted saying yes to an opportunity and figuring that out. And maybe it's not a great fit, maybe it's not something I want to do again, but I do think all those experiences add up to allow you to really function well in an early stage environment, whether it's your company or you're an early member in someone else's.
Yeah, just to echo Catherine a little bit, I definitely am lucky. I have a co-founder who has an MBA and does the majority of the business side. And so when we first got connected, I really thought I was going to be doing no business whatsoever. And I learned really quickly, like, that's just not possible. So it's the little things of pitching in to make a pitch deck, which you have to then learn what a pitch deck is to kind of go back to on our last discussion, but also it's expanding the technology that I am working on. So I'm very used to like wet lab stuff, but now I need to learn how to do microelectronics and more soldering and also like, oh, we need a company website. So I need to use Codex and Claude Code and just figuring out all of the little things that is well beyond just wet lab also accounts for the little hats that you wear.
I'll jump in to finalize this a little bit. So for my experience, the startup kind of atmosphere leads you to you don't necessarily know what the problem is that you're going to address today or tomorrow until that problem hits. And for us, it's been, you need to be organized so that you have some idea of what those issues might be. And then you have to prioritize to figure out, okay, what can I solve today? What can I put off till tomorrow? And then you have to figure out, okay, these are things that aren't going away. We need to figure out how to manage them. And so I'm an example of, yes, classically trained scientist who now works as our CFO essentially, right? So I cover all the books, I do all the I understand where our budget is, I understand how things are working. When there's a question about how much money we have and when that's going to run out, it's all on me. It's funny to me how our training as scientists has led us to be able to solve problems. And so really it's a matter of just identifying what the problem is, figuring out, can I solve this? If the answer is yes, it's going to take a little bit of work, then you just kind of, roll up your sleeves and get to it. And then really recognizing when you have to ask for help. And for me, it's been when your co-founders look at you and say, are you sure you can take care of that? That really means like, hey, I don't think you can take care of that. Let's figure out how to do this better. And so it's starting to understand those things and being aware of the feedback that you're getting, because when you're a founder, you want to just make sure that you're not being told what you think you want to hear. You need to be told what you actually need to hear. And so I think that it's a matter of you can wear a whole lot of hats, and you have to be cognizant of, should I be wearing this hat? And, when do I need to give this hat up? Because I think that answer changes over time and based off of where you are in your business.
That's very well put, David. That makes a lot of sense. I think we've all been there with those looks. Are you sure? All right. I would now like to go on to a question that I think many of us will be interested in here. Looking back, if you could know something back then in the early stages of your progress that you know now, what would it be? And are there any particular things that you went through that ended up being that really valuable learning experiences? This one takes some more thought.
I could check in, say a couple words on that. One thing that I thought, and again, it gets back to these sort of hats that I thought I was wearing, or at least I was attempting to. And that comes not one thing I learned very early on that well, I shouldn't say learned, didn't learn, and I look back and see it now is getting a legal advisors and attorneys on board sooner than I did in the past. Because again, I was so focused on the science side of the equation and trying to understand the business end of it, trying to speak the right language to get people interested in and funding our startups and our business ventures, that I wasn't really focused on the legal aspects of it, both from intellectual property, but also from grants and contracts. I shouldn't say grants and contracts, but contracts, and also the implications for return on investments downstream of licensing agreements, royalty, and how anti-stacking provisions in licensing agreements can really impact a person's ability or person's willingness to put money into your company. And that's one regret I had, which we tried to balance our eye, and a couple of our founders that are not legal experts tried to handle by ourselves early on, and it caused a lot of delays and things I think we could have done a much better job on. So my advice is, if you can afford it, to bring legal help on sooner than later.
I would like to take a different tack. Sorry, Liza.
Yeah.
I was going to take a slightly different tack on this. I think that one thing that's really interesting about our locality. So Maine is transactional from a business sense. Everything is done with a conversation. And yes, you can do that over Zoom, but it's way more effective over a cup of coffee. And to me, what's been really interesting and incisive was once we were able to tap into the ecosystem and knew who to talk to, things got, I wouldn't say easy, but they became facilitated. You can find a person that you need to get help with what you need help with. But until you're able to tap in and find that right first person, it's really tricky. And so I don't know how to answer your question directly, Caitlin, as in, what should I have learned? But I think that if 5 years ago I was able to make more connections within the ecosystem, I would have had an opportunity to short circuit some of the learnings we needed to make because we did so much networking sort of tangentially around the ecosystem before we found people that really could help us directly.
Ironically, David, you started to say stuff I was going to talk about. I really was going to just focus on, we were in the beginning, we were so focused on like securing the funding, getting our lab rental agreement, and starting to buy our lab supplies. And I was so focused on getting in the lab that I didn't realize until much later that I could have been focusing on networking way sooner than I really did. Because networking, for us at least, has really helped us connect to the people that can help us and give us advice navigating the very beginnings of a startup. But also, because we're doing a women's health product, we actually were able to do a lot of indirect customer discovery. And we actually like completely pivoted. We originally thought fertility was going to be like our first in market, where the people that care the most about our product would be women that are trying to get pregnant. But what we found from like talking to people about just like what we were doing during like just normal networking events, whether that's Startup Maine Week or Med Tech or whatever the conference was that we were able to talk to, we started to realize that women going through perimenopause were actually way more affected and actually cared way deeply about what their hormones were doing, and that the women that are trying to conceive are one, there's less of them that need that help and that insight, but also they're generally happy with the options that are already available, where women suffering from perimenopause want more answers and want more data.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add, for me, I think it took some time to learn. I'm still learning. You really have to think about like where you want your business to be. In 5 years, if you envision that you were running, a 20-person organization of some sort, or you envision that you have exited at year three, those are very different things. And I don't think I understood the ramifications for that in terms of the decisions you're making now. The minute you take outside funding, you're on a certain path. And so to really think carefully about that, both from a sort of trajectory, but even towards Peter's point about terms that are in these various contracts, they can really mean a great deal. And I very much underappreciated that. And so that's something that I think it's not really talked about because it's not exciting, like to review the contracts and all the legalities, but small words can really make a big difference. And the personal trajectory you're on, you should really think about seriously too, in terms of how you can get there and the decisions you're making now, and what you need to do that.
That is all very insightful, panel. Thank you. Okay, we now have approximately 12 minutes left, so I would like to take this opportunity to open it up to the audience for some questions. We already do have a few questions that are coming in, so I'll start out with some of these, and also if you have other questions, please feel free to drop them. Probably we won't be able to get to all of them, but I will do my best to pick out the broad themes. So the first question we had dropped in the chat was about quantity of companies. So the question for all of you is, if you have had multiple companies, can you share more about sort of how many companies you've done and how those have overlapped? For those of you who only have one and been just working on one, what would you think of potentially getting involved in another? Is multiple companies an option here?
I can start us off. So this is my first where I am the founder of the company. I have been a part of other startups as part of essentially the founding team, but it's certainly a different thing. One of them actually just exited earlier this year, which is great. I personally like to be at the earliest stage. I always sort of make the line that like once they start tracking your PTO, like that's my time to exit an organization. But yes, I have been a part of multiple startups in different formats. Not all of them have succeeded or have gone the way that I anticipated. I think it's really challenging. I would envision it challenging to do more than one, other than perhaps in an advisory or sort of mentorship perspective. I could see working with another startup, but I could not see being fully in more than one.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. This is my first. I also don't have any prior startup experience just because I am just starting. But I will say I also don't think I could see a way to do multiple at once, just because I like to think it's very similar to like when you get your PhD, where it kind of your brain never stops, and you're always thinking or working on what you're working on. And I don't know how I would be able to split my time and my brain power on multiple at one time.
I'll jump in and just say that this is my first startup, and I am focused on the thing in front of me, and that is it. We will see how this turns out in a couple of years before we make a decision about what to do next.
Yeah, so I've been involved in several. The first one I was sort of tangentially involved with the humanization of antibodies way back when I was at Scripps, and the company did really well and it went public, and then but I was sort of more in an advisory role. It was my intellectual property partially that was associated with it. Then the company that I was really much more involved with was the small company Cell Matrix that turned into the publicly traded company. Um, and that was I was more heavily involved with from a day-to-day basis. But having said those, none of these companies were I a full-time employee. I was either a scientific advisory board member or a co-founder and equity holder. But so having multiple companies at the same time is if depending upon your approach is would be difficult, I would think. Now I do serve on scientific advisory boards and as advisors, even though I am a founder, co-founder of our new company, CryptoMedix. And you have to be careful about conflicts of interest and competing interests. So that's always something to keep in mind. But I personally wouldn't want to necessarily be day to day with several small startup companies, even though I've been involved with multiple companies, getting them off the ground and serving in a role as scientific advisory board and in other capacities.
Okay, I think we have touched a little bit on how the Maine ecosystem is pretty unique from other states, and that can have some specific advantages. So I'd like to combine a couple of questions that I see in the chat. And the one is, could you touch on us what you have found that is most advantageous, Maine specific? What about being in this place has been of the most help to you? And then at the same time, what do you feel is still missing? We have a lot of fabulous organizations that really help to uphold, promote, and encourage entrepreneurs such as yourselves, not the least of which is the Maine Life Sciences Network and BioMaine. Nevertheless, we could always do better. So in your perspectives, what else could be provided to make your jobs easier?
I think one aspect that's really been fantastic is part of the ecosystem support. So I was a participant in the Dirigo Labs Accelerator earlier this year, and I know there's other accelerator incubator programs around the state that don't necessarily provide cash, which we talked about early in the conversation, but there is all of those other aspects where you need support, whether it's building your first financial model, understanding how to structure customer conversations. So I think Maine does a great job through these various avenues of allowing, I don't know if you call it in-kind support, but other ways of supporting the business development. I know Maine also has a free law and business clinic that has provides support for early stage companies as well. Um, and I think the challenging part is, from what I understand, it's hard to raise out of state capital from Maine. Boston, Bay Area investors, they don't look at a Maine founding company in the same way. And so as Maine continues to kind of build up the ecosystem, I think a lot of these factors will start to improve, but it is still, it's a smaller ecosystem. And so that has, disadvantages in certain ways too.
Yeah, I'll say another really big advantage of being in Maine is just like the University of Maine system. So not only am I lucky enough to rent lab space at the University of Maine, but also they have an Innovate for Maine program where they give an intern to startup companies. If you have less than 50 employees, you get them for 400 hours in the summer for free. And I've definitely been very thankful for the intern that we got this summer. She's amazing. But I will say one of the biggest disadvantages is just like the distance of the state, and the problem of we have to travel the state by a car, and so it takes a lot of time. I currently live in Augusta, so that I could be equal distance from Orono and Portland because there's so many startup events in Portland, but our lab facilities are in Orono. But that requires me being in a car for 3 hours a day, despite which direction I'm going for the day. So I don't know if this is an organization solution, but if we could just find like fast trains or something, I think that could really help connect people across the state because we're just so large and spread out.
Yeah, I can say a few words. So from my experience, most of most of my experience it comes from very early stage companies that have progressed over time. And I've only been back to the state for, probably about 15 years now, 10, 15 years. And the thing I've noticed is that in very early stage companies, sort of that virtual idea stage, if you will, I was impressed with, coming from a small state, the number of resources that are available, especially, for example, the Innovation Center here at Maine Health and the entrepreneurial programs at UMaine and other places that give people take the little edge off, that scary edge off from trying to start off with, especially in life sciences. Um, and 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 I think on the downside, the in the life sciences area, depending upon the model you're looking at, especially in therapeutic development, which is a long-term type of endeavor, the amount of resources that are available, what I found early on, the amounts of money that are required for really getting something off the ground or making it viable for a larger VC or even an early stage VC that likes to invest in early stage startup companies, there's still a substantial amount of money. Those resources tend to be more limited, I think, than going down to Boston or New York or other places, at least from my experience. So depending upon the type of company that you're trying to develop and to move forward, there can be pros and cons, I think. And the larger sums of money, while I'm sure that they're here, it's a little bit more difficult to tap into, especially if you don't have a infrastructure set to really exploit your idea and make it valuable and build value in it to attract some of the larger firms that are required to support an ongoing clinical trial, for example.
Really quickly, I just want to tie this together and say that the one wonderful advantage of Maine is that with the fact that you have to talk to everyone, there are people who are on your side everywhere. And so one of the things that's been extremely helpful is when you talk to people, everyone wants you to succeed because they want the state to succeed and they want to see good things get done. And so for me, it's been super helpful to have conversations, even if it doesn't lead to funding necessarily, even if it doesn't lead to the right next connection, it's a step in the right direction. And it's somebody who you know is supportive.
That is an excellent way to leave it, Peter. Thank you so much. So yes, we are 1 minute left in this, so I would like to take this opportunity to thank our four fabulous panelists. Catherine, Liza, Peter, David, you all have been wonderful. We appreciate your insight, you taking the time to share with us what you know and what you have been through. Also, thank you very much to our sponsoring organization, Maine Life Sciences Network and BioMaine. We really appreciate you bringing us together in this way. And finally, thank you all attendees for coming, for listening, for your excellent questions. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize, but please be on the lookout for a follow-up email to this panel from BioMaine with more information about how to get involved, future events, and how to follow up with any information. All right, with that, I think we will wrap it up. It's 1 o'clock. Thank you all. See you next time.